I'm Ashton Addison from the Crypto Coin Show, and today on Blockchain Interviews, back with us Max Freeman, author of Bitcoin's Purpose Restored, here to talk about privacy coins, including Bitcoin or the lack of privacy, Zcash, Monero, EpicCash, and much more. Max, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Ashton.
I would love to start off our conversation by sort of getting a high level on your expertise in Bitcoin and privacy coins and why Bitcoin is lacking privacy. And I think a lot of people don't really know the details. They know Bitcoin's open and transparent, but they also know that people tried to use it to obfuscate, but I don't think that's the right technology. Bitcoin is not the right technology for privacy. And I know you would know a lot about this, so I would love to start off with that.
Sure. So a bit about my background. I've been in this field for almost 10 years now. I started in late 2016. Like many people, I fell in love with the original vision or version of Bitcoin that was focused on peer-to-peer payments and watched the transition to a Wall Street institutional focused asset that's focused on investment rather than usage for payments. With regard to privacy tech in particular, I became fascinated with a blockchain compression algorithm or technique known as Mimblewimble that was theorized in 2016 and then finally implemented as a code base in a couple projects in 2018. And I realized that if you could apply Mimblewimble to the original Bitcoin formula, then you could really realize Satoshi's dream. Satoshi in the white paper actually is quite clear about his views on privacy and anonymity, and he actually describes how to achieve a measure of privacy and anonymity on the Bitcoin blockchain. Simply, the technology wasn't available at the time for him to build the type of system that we now have today in Epic.
Very interesting. I know that you have authored a book on Bitcoin's purpose and probably the privacy aspect of it as well. Is the main focus of the book on this part of the technology you're talking about and implementing Mimblewimble and the privacy?
Actually, no. It starts with Satoshi's dream. If you go back to the white paper, today, if you ask people that own Bitcoin, what do you own and why do you own it? They say, well, I buy it because the price is going to go up and then I'm going to sell it to somebody and I want to make money. And that's the end of the story. But Satoshi doesn't talk about the store of value. He doesn't talk about number go up. He doesn't talk about digital gold. He's quite clear. All he talks about is a peer-to-peer permissionless payment system where anyone can pay anyone else without having to trust a third party. And so today in Bitcoin, not the least of which because of the lack of privacy and the increasing centralization, you really have to trust a range of people in the overall mix, not the least of which is the tainted coins problem, which is that if I receive a payment from you, then I need to trust that you're not going to send me dirty coins, because if I go and deposit those to an exchange and they don't like where those coins have been, then I'm going to lose access not just to those coins, but potentially to my entire account, and maybe I'll have law enforcement show up on my doorstep.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of intricacies in Bitcoin that I think a lot of people don't realize, and it's definitely been publicized, mainstream, institutionalized. I think if you look at the top holders, Satoshi's still number one, but it's like BlackRock, MicroStrategy, the rest of the American stock market guys have really taken a hold of it, and they don't really care maybe necessarily about privacy. I feel like they might start thinking about that once they want to make some moves on it. But I want to dive into more of the actual privacy coins. There's sort of three main. There's been a lot of attempts at different privacy coins, but there's three main ones that have stuck around and told the tale of time so far, which is Zcash, Monero, and EpicCash. I know that you've done a lot of research on all of them and worked with EpicCash building it. Can you explain sort of the main differences philosophically and design principles between the three main privacy coins?
Sure. So I would say the first and most important thing is that if you have a network with optional privacy, then most people are not going to use that option. If you look at Zcash in particular, something like 1% or even less than 1% of transactions are actually private, because the default is to use it as a transparent network, and not everybody supports the privacy features, different wallets, different exchanges, and so on. And so if you think about it, also, when you opt into privacy, you're kind of saying, I have something to hide, and you're making yourself stand out, especially if nobody else is using the privacy. So if you really think about it, if you want privacy, you need to use something that has always on privacy. And both Monero and Epic have that approach, where all transactions are private. You can't turn it off. You can allow others to selectively view your transactions if you want to, but you can control who gets to see what. You as the user are in control. Now, Monero has done some great work, but technically it's actually not a private blockchain. What it is it's a public blockchain with obfuscation. And so what that means is that your transactions are mixed with other people's transactions, and the data is still there to be analyzed. Even before AI advances in machine learning and advancements in computing power, it was possible to figure out quite a bit of information about what's going on the ledger. If you go and talk to the chain surveillance companies at a crypto conference and ask them what can you see about the Monero network, they'll actually show you their tools, and quite a bit can be revealed about what's going on. There were actually 18 people in Japan a few months ago that thought Monero was private, and they're sitting in a jail cell right now because they discovered that it's actually not quite as private as they thought. So Epic is unique in that it doesn't actually store the data in the blockchain. There's a couple of or the data in the blockchain that would be needed to de-anonymize user transactions. There's a couple of techniques. One is known as coin join, which merges all transactions in a block together. And the other is cut through, which essentially removes unnecessary history from the chain. So it doesn't matter advancements in computing or even quantum computing. The data is simply not there in the blockchain to be revealed.
It's very interesting, and I want to touch on both of those. The Zcash, really not being private, but not really if no one's using it, and also the Monero there, because I didn't know that. On Zcash, with only 1% of the transactions actually being private, it's really not sure, it's a privacy coin that nobody uses the privacy function of. I didn't really know that. Is it like you just tick a box to make it private, or does it cost more? What's the reason that are people afraid to actually make the private transaction? What's the issue going on with Zcash?
Well, you kind of need to go back into ancient history. Zcash is almost 10 years old now. I believe it's the original Satoshi code with privacy bolted on. And if you go back to 2016, they did really pioneering work. Zcash is essentially like 3 different networks that all are under one umbrella. The first, I may get this wrong, but I believe that the first version was called Sprout, and then they moved to something called Sapling, and now they have Orchard. And so under the hood, it's actually not transparent or private. What you have is transparent, which is the vast majority of transactions, 99% plus, or these 3 different privacy pools. And so where the complexities come in is there's the transparent side, and then there's the private side and how they relate, and it just gets really complicated until Mimblewimble. The trade-offs involved in blockchain privacy really weren't worth the headache. I like to say that Mimblewimble is really a blockchain scalability advantage that has the valuable side benefit of providing a measure of privacy, whereas it's not the only focus of it. And where that really comes into play is scalability. So if you took the entire Bitcoin transaction history since 2009 and said, well, we're gonna put that on the Monero structure, the Zcash structure, and the Epic structure, the Bitcoin blockchain is about 680 gigabytes today. If you did that on Monero or Zcash, you'd be talking into the mid-single digits of terabytes. So you need a lot more storage space for to run a node, which means it's going to be in data centers, which means the hardware that are required to run the nodes. It gets further and further away from Satoshi's vision of one CPU, one vote, everybody running their own infrastructure and not having to rely on third parties, which is where trust and permission and especially now regulation come in. Now contrast that with Epic, where that same transaction history would be, instead of 700 gigabytes or multiple terabytes, it would be somewhere between 25 to 50 gigabytes. So Epic through Mimblewimble really compresses the data, and it's a byproduct of that compression process that the privacy is achieved. All transactions in a block are merged into one giant transaction, and if there's any offsetting transactions, they're kind of eliminated from the chain. It's just a tiny little bit of residual data that's needed there. And so back to your original question about why people don't use it, I think that Zcash is really just it's marketed as a privacy coin, and people, when they want investment exposure to the privacy narrative, we've seen it quadruple, or I think even more in the past few months. I want to invest in privacy, so let me go and buy some of that. But they don't actually care about using it as a private transaction medium. Something like Monero actually has quite a bit more transactional utility. But as we'll get into further in the interview, there's actually some flies in that ointment in the Monero world as well that are calling its ability to fulfill its original mission into question.
Yeah, now I want to dive into that as well. Further to what you said about Zcash in the beginning there, you're saying it's sort of like using the Bitcoin code but tackling on some privacy. With you just authoring your newest book on Bitcoin's purpose, I know that you've studied Bitcoin intensely. Is Epic similar in the fact that you're using some of the Bitcoin core and then tackling on privacy, or how is it different than Zcash in that aspect?
So it doesn't use any of Satoshi's code. It's the conceptual DNA of Satoshi's original design, which is 21 million, no ICO, no pre-mine, nobody in control. It's really an answer to the question of, if Satoshi could start over with today's technology and the knowledge accumulated from the thousands of alternative coin experiments in the industry's first 15 years, what would the obvious design choices be? And so the book starts with the white paper. It starts with back when Bitcoin was Bitcoin and how it evolved into BTC, which is really an investment class that is really part and parcel integrated with the financial system that it was intended to replace. That's why I call it Bitcoin's purpose restored, because if you look at Satoshi's writings, especially the white paper, it says that the purpose is peer-to-peer payments without asking permission and without relying on third-party trust. And that's what Epic does. I would say it's about 98% of the DNA of Bitcoin, but on a completely fresh code base. You can't just bolt Mimblewimble onto a blockchain, or else I'm sure Bitcoin would have done it long ago. You have to start with a clean sheet design.
Yeah, no, that's really good to know. And I'm sure you do the same, but we always recommend people, especially if they're getting into Bitcoin and crypto, to have read the white paper. It's only a few pages. It's not that long. But I feel like your book, like, people will learn even more about Bitcoin from the white paper, and then the evolution, and then also what are the final pieces that need to be put into place, like what's in Epic. So I feel like you're not just learning about Epic, you're actually learning a lot more about Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like to say that Epic and today's BTC, which I draw a distinction between Satoshi's original Bitcoin and what has evolved into BTC, which is really a Wall Street dominated asset. They find their own niches. If you want a version of Bitcoin that is dependent on and a part of the existing financial system, if that's a feature for you rather than a bug, then go with the orange one that costs trillions of dollars already. If you want a people's version of Bitcoin, where you can pay anyone, anywhere, anytime, any amount, any reason privately, that you can run your own node, you can mine at home on an ordinary laptop, that you don't really have to worry about what Jerome Powell is going to do, or what the people in the European Union in Brussels are going to do, or what happens in Washington or Wall Street. There's billions of people that are not really going to be served by the institutional version of Bitcoin. And instead of leaving them behind, there's Epic for those people. And also, I'm sure most of your listeners have heard of Ray Dalio from Bridgewater Associates. He's sort of become a recent Bitcoin convert over the past couple of years, after starting out as quite a skeptic. And he had a very insightful comment recently. He said, "I don't think that it has a future as a reserve asset for the powers that be, because it doesn't have any privacy and everybody can see what everyone is doing. Gold has been the ultimate reserve money for the world for 6,000 years. And it's not really known how much gold is in a vault in Shanghai or Frankfurt or New York or anywhere else. But on the Bitcoin transparent ledger, everybody knows exactly how much money everyone has. And you can say, okay, well, there's benefits to that transparency, sure. But also, money is now explicitly a weapon, as we've seen in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And now we have trade wars and tariffs. And so let's say countries accumulate so-called strategic Bitcoin reserves. Okay, well, now their political or economic adversaries can say, well, we're going to sanction and blockade those coins. You're not allowed to deal with those coins. And if you do, there's a 40% withholding tax on them. And that can change arbitrarily. Today's clean coins are tomorrow's tainted coins. What a lot of people don't know is that out of the nearly 20 million BTC coins that exist, around 11 million of them have been through the Silk Road. And there was a landmark court case in the United States in Texas in 2021, United States versus 2,967 Bitcoins, where the government seized coins from, you're laughing, maybe you know about this already. The government seized coins from somebody who bought them unknowingly through legitimate channels because they had been through the Silk Road 10 years prior. And so trillions of dollars are one click, one court order away from arbitrary confiscation. And so if you want the hard money properties of the original Bitcoin design with 21 million based around proof of work, with censorship resistance taken to the next level, you can have that in Epic. And it just happens to be millions of times cheaper today, at least until people realize what it is. And then we'll see if the ratio of Epic to Bitcoin price stays as it is, or maybe flips.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story, Max. I want to dive into the Monero half, a few questions on that and how Epic works there as well. I did not hear about this Japanese people being arrested from Monero transactions. I recall in the past some exchanges that were holding different currencies that had been, seized by the government. It was showing, okay, we seized this much Bitcoin, this much Litecoin, Monero unknown. And what I understood was that the government couldn't tell how much Monero they were holding and that it actually was private. So maybe you know more details about that. And I would love to know the difference in how you can actually see into Monero and why Epic may be different than that.
Yeah, so I would actually be skeptical of them claiming that they don't know how much Monero was seized, because if you run the wallet software and you have the private keys, then you know how many coins you have. That's not at issue. However, to the other part of your question, which is how it works on the chain. So they have something called ring signatures. And so when you send a transaction, you and currently 15 other people, the rings are 16, all jointly sign a transaction. And so there's this idea of plausible deniability, that it may have been 15 other people that signed your transaction, rather than it being identifiably you. But if you drill down within that, and there's a great series on YouTube called Breaking Monero that gets into the various ways that you can de-anonymize it. If you don't use it perfectly with very specific knowledge about how to not leave trails and leave traces, then you essentially compromise your own privacy. And so, as an example, there was an exchange called Trade Ogre based out of Canada that was recently shut down by the Canadian government. And so now the Canadian government has all of the transaction history of Monero users on that exchange. Well, when they feed that to the chain surveillance companies, primarily Chainalysis, CipherTrace, and Elliptic, I think are the top three ones. Now they can cross-reference that with the information they have. A lot of chain surveillance companies actually run nodes, and they can say, okay, well, out of the ring of 15, these 3 can be eliminated, and then another hop back. These 4, we now know who those are, and so you go from an X% probability to a Y% probability of being able to pinpoint you. And so the way Epic works is quite different because, again, as I mentioned, at the blockchain level, all transactions in a block are merged with every other transaction, and it's protected by something called zero knowledge proofs, which is actually the same approach that Zcash uses. If you really get in and study this stuff, there's sort of a tribal aspect to the Zcash fans versus the Monero fans, and the Zcash people will say, yeah, our privacy is better, and then the Monero people will say, well, but nobody uses privacy, you're mainly a transparent coin, and so on and so forth. But with Epic, you get that always on privacy, and it is a zero knowledge approach where the data simply doesn't exist in the blockchain to be read later.
Yeah, I agree. If you're gonna have a privacy coin, you might as well make it only private. Otherwise, what's the point? And with those details on Monero, earlier in 2025, I saw in the news that Monero was actually attacked through the chain, and because the market cap isn't the size of Bitcoin, it's easier to make attack vectors on it, and they didn't have full control, but it seemed like a bunch of the blockchain blocks were reorganized by bad actors. I'm sure you would know more about this, but I feel like that's a threat to people that are holding Monero, and that maybe they won't be able to use it, or coins can be moved around and things like that. Can you explain more about this?
Yeah, so I'm not sure to classify them. The network is called Cubic that has been doing this to Monero, and I'm not sure it would be accurate yet to classify them as a bad actor or a good actor. They claim to have noble intentions, and that it's just a stress test, and they're actually helping. But there's obviously quite a bit of disagreement on that. Essentially, what they did is they attracted Monero miners to gain a disproportionate influence over the mining power, what's known as the hash rate of the network, and then they reorganized the blocks. So they actually in Monero, the block times are 2.5 minutes, and so they over a 15-minute period they essentially undid all of the transactions in a 6-block window. So if you had sent transactions in that 15-minute time frame, then it was as if you didn't send them. And so that obviously caused quite a bit of stir. And then later they actually did an 18-block deep reorganization. So this was a 45-minute window where you couldn't rely on the transactions to be going through properly. Now, in response, Kraken, which is the main trading venue for people to exchange Monero to other currencies, they said, we're going to require 720 blocks to process a deposit. So 720 blocks times 2.5 minutes. What is that? That's 18 hours, something like that. So the Cubic was able to impose nearly a 1 day delay on people's ability to use this network. But there's nothing that says they couldn't have reorganized all the blocks for a full day. And then Kraken would say, well, we're going to make you wait 2-3 weeks for
Yeah.
this deposit to go through. So essentially what you have is a sword poised over the neck of Monero. And so that's why I referenced earlier, are they good actors? Are they bad actors? I don't know, but the risk calculus really changed. And so fortunately, Epic has a design defense against that, which is something known as polyphasic proof of work. So in Monero, they use a single algorithm that is mined primarily on CPUs, known as RandomX. And Epic uses three algorithms running in parallel. An attacker would need 51% of all three algorithms, not just one. And so if you think about the difficulty of throwing one ball up in the air and catching it versus juggling three balls, or in the future, 4 or 5 or 6 or however many algorithms end up operating in Epic, it's a structural defense against that type of thing.
That's really interesting. And do you recommend, if you're going to be using Epic or Monero, to actually be running a node and participating in the network?
100%, because if you're not running your own node, then really you're giving up the privacy, number one, because you're revealing the transaction data to someone else. And you can also be denied service. So whoever you're connecting to, if they decide to stop allowing you to connect to them, then you are frozen out. And that's why aspects like the node size, how much space on disk and what type of hardware you need to be able to run it is very important. Bitcoin Magazine put out an analysis, I think it was a year or two ago, on if you wanted to run a Bitcoin node in Nigeria, what would that cost you? And the answer came out to $800. $800 is well within reach of people in the US and Europe and other rich countries. But in Nigeria, that's quite a bit of money. And so the number of Bitcoin nodes is capped pretty much at around 20,000. With Epic, there's an app called Money Printer. The website for that is moneyprinter.app, where with a single click, you can be running an Epic miner, and it actually includes a node. So there's 6.4 billion CPU and GPU devices that people already own for other purposes that when they're not doing whatever their primary purpose is, can be brought into service to secure the network and earn a bit of reward for their owners. So that sets the stage for potentially hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of nodes and beyond.
Wow. I didn't know that. I know that it's a pain to get the Bitcoin node running, downloading it for, days, and then
3
syncing
weeks.
it. Yeah, weeks, syncing it up and all this stuff, and then competing with warehouses of ASICs, and like you're never going to get a Bitcoin at this point. You might as well win the lottery. It's probably a better chance. But with this Money Printer app, being able to create a node for Epic, so you're saying you can actually do that on any laptop, any phone even, and just go and just click it, and then how quickly until you're sort of verifying transactions in the network?
Yeah, so not phones yet.
Okay.
Phones don't quite have the processing power to compete with PCs. You would get so little that it's kind of not worth doing. But if you have a MacBook or you have an old Windows laptop, literally within 30 seconds, you download the app, click start, and it does all the configuration for you. That's one of the beautiful parts of the polyphasic proof of work, is that Epic runs multiple algorithms that take turns competing for blocks. So the CPUs only compete with the CPUs, the GPUs only compete with the GPUs, and then there's a small slice for ASICs as well.
That's nice. More fair competition. You're not competing on an old laptop versus a warehouse of miners. And
And it also,
Yeah.
I would also add that that has an important, this is one of the things that I get into in the book. It has an important implication for the long-term survivability of the network, at least in its current guise, because it costs tens of billions of dollars in capital expenditure every year to refresh the ASICs that are needed to keep the Bitcoin network running. And so with Epic, you get the same proof of work security, but the world doesn't have to keep pumping in billions of dollars, which when the numbers going up and everybody's feeling optimistic, then no problem, that money's there. But you're in a mode where you're dependent on the willingness of the banking system of Wall Street and institutional money to keep funding that investment. And so if they, for whatever reason, are unwilling or unable to supply that investment, then within a couple of years, the chain itself becomes less secure or even unreliable. So things have worked well so far, but over the long term, there's a big question mark there.
Definitely. You know, we've had you and the EpicCash team on the show for a couple of years now. There's a few episodes before, and it's still going strong. And speaking of long-term survivability, I know that Epic is going into the version 4 of the network. Maybe you can explain what that means and what are the newest updates.
Yeah, so Epic launched its mainnet on September 2nd, 2019, which means it's over 6 years now. There's been over 2.5 million blocks, which I remember reading a study, I think, that I think it was 92% of crypto projects are dead after their first year. I mean, to have lasted 6 years, we must be well into a 99+% failure rate. So simply continuing to exist is quite a major achievement. But there's a lot of ghost change that simply nobody uses. They have no development. They just haven't died yet, because nobody's bothered to unplug it. And there might be a bit of money there. I think Bitcoin Gold and some of these other strange ones still exist from 2000 whatever. But Epic is still quite actively developed. And so version 4 of the protocol is essentially a bigger release than all of the other ones combined. There's been a number of years of accumulated improvements and enhancements and edge cases, reliability improvements. Mimblewimble was really a frontier technology that had a lot of promise, but also a lot of teething problems that needed to be solved to really make it ready for prime time and mass adoption. And so version 4 is the accumulated learnings of all of that experience and really setting the stage for further mass adoption.
Yeah, that's incredible. And yeah, I know many projects don't even last a week or a year, and it depends on the bull and bear market conditions. But 2019, that's already been through multiple cycles as well. So it's great to see it sticking around. And you know, we talked about the money printer app and contributing to the network. Are there any other ways that people can contribute to the network, or just what's the best way to try out the coin and the apps?
So it's a community project. It's like Bitcoin was in the early days. Anyone can get involved. The code is fully open source. You can go and grab it off of GitHub and fork the repo and play around with it. You can join the community and get involved. There's tons of educational content out there, videos, articles, infographics, my book. I always like to say that the best investment anyone can make before they invest their money is in their own education. And there's really a lot to sink your teeth into here on many levels. People really don't understand what money is, and all of these digital assets tend to get lumped into the same bucket. It kind of drives me crazy when Uber drivers ask me, well, how is this different than Pepe the Frog or Trump coin or other, other silly stuff. Epic is designed to be money. It's designed to be decentralized, censorship resistant, hard money that will be around decades from now, and that's a much tougher challenge than creating something to make a quick buck. So I would say there's something for everybody. Come in, take a look. It's a very friendly group. The way that this is spread so far, without any central force behind it or institutional support, is through individuals who are passionate about the vision of what type of world can we have if we move to this as money. The Bitcoin maxis like to say, fix the money, fix the world. And this really is mainly just talk in a lot of other cases. And there's billions of people that need this. I don't know if you caught it, but in Vietnam a few weeks ago, 86 million bank accounts were shut down overnight. There was a new biometric law passed, and if you didn't jump through the hoops the way that the people in power wanted you to, then you lost access to your money. And that was not an isolated incident, because the week before that, Thailand had shut down 3 million bank accounts, and now you need a digital ID to access certain websites in the UK. I mean, all you need to do is look at the Agenda 2030 and Agenda 21, the so-called Sustainable Development Goals from these multinational organizations, to see what kind of vision of the world is coming for you. And Epic really represents a chance to chart your own course and preserve a degree of sovereignty and autonomy, not just in your money, but that extends to your whole life. Because if you aren't able to sustain yourself and someone else is in charge of your financial resources, then that really circumscribes what you can and can't do.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Max, for all the insights into how cryptocurrencies should run, in the differences and similarities from Zcash, Monero, EpicCash, all of the privacy coins and Bitcoin. Of course, the more you know about Bitcoin, the better, and about cryptocurrencies and privacy, and make sure you're doing it right and not using a privacy coin that is only optional privacy, where only 1% of people are using it. And I'm going to leave a link in the show notes to your book, Bitcoin's Purpose Restored, on Amazon and wherever else the books are sold, and the Money Printer app, and the community links, and any updates for version 4 and everything else people need to know about Epic. We'll have it there. I really appreciate you coming on again. It is great to see you, great to hear the latest updates, and there's been a lot in the privacy sector happening this year, which is good for all privacy coins together, but it also wakes people up to, hey, what do we actually need in a privacy coin and in currencies, and to not get shut out of our bank accounts or lose access to our funds and control our own money, control our own world. So I appreciate all your insights, Max. Thank you.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Ashton.